Hello friends! How is everybody doing today? Today we're going to be talking about, well, game design docs, why you need a better one, and we're also going to make one on stream. We're going to make one with everybody here. And that should be a lot of fun. So let's start out real basic. What is a game design doc? Honestly, it's the thing that I hear people skip the most often, which is a shame and a tragedy. Your game design doc is a living document that outlines everything that you plan on doing and all of your goals that you want to reach during development. And without a good game design doc, it's very easy to end up creeping into scope creep. It's very easy to end up falling apart in your throughout the design cycle, losing track of your vision, losing track of your design, frankly, as well as losing track of your team. A good design doc keeps your team on the same page. And whether that team is just you, and let's be honest, sometimes you need to keep on your same page yourself better, we all do, or whether the team is 5 or 10 or 50 or 600 people, a clean game design doc is incredibly important to make sure that everybody's on the same page at all times. So. There we go. I'm going to walk you through my game design doc that I use. This is just a template. I will be making it available after the stream, so that anybody can access it. Well, can make access a copy of it, I should say. And we'll go from there. I'm using Google Docs because, honestly, just why not, right? Like, Google Docs is just a very simple and efficient way of working on any project. I mean, yeah, there's a thought. That doesn't matter. That's not important. Actually, wait. I need to adjust my. I need to adjust my crop. There we go. That's better. Actually. There, that's fine. That's good. That's good and possible, and yeah, there we go. And on the right too. There. Perfect. So, your game design doc is your guiding light. This is the light that shines through the darkness. And real quick, what we have as an overview is your project overview. This section starts out with your elevator pitch. Your elevator pitch is... How many people here actually have an elevator pitch for any game for your games? Available where, Jade? I will make it available on the Gogodo Discord, and I will also tweet it out, as well as my own Discord, of course. I should add the Gogodo Discord invite link. Hey, I see Redefined Gamedev in the chat. Would you link me an invite link to the Gogodo Game Jam Discord so I can put it into my description? So, how many people here actually have made a elevator pitch? An elevator pitch is incredibly important. It's just a real quick citation of what your game is in a way that's catchy. It's, hey, I'm going up this elevator with 90 seconds, and I am in the elevator with the head of marketing for some major company. I am going up the elevator with a talent agent who is currently seeking new talent. I'm going up an elevator, and I have 90 seconds to sell them on why I am great before they walk away and I never see them again. An elevator pitch is your quick and dirty what makes you stand out and what makes you interesting. And honestly, you should have an elevator pitch for any project you work on, game design or otherwise. Like, a good elevator pitch is very important. You've attempted, but words are not your specialty. That's fair. That's fair. The elevator pitch is not easy to do because sometimes it's easy to get lost in your brain mind while you're thinking about your project. It's like, well, what is the project? What is it really? What is it about? Well, it's like this game, but that game. But then you're describing it in relation to other games and not really explaining where it is yourself. So we'll cover all these in more detail in a bit. First, I want to go over the entire thing. And then later in the stream, we'll be making our own game design doc for a game that was actually brought up during my last chat stream. A game concept, rather, that was brought up during the last chat stream. Before we go any much further, though, I do want to make one quick announcement. The Go Godot Game Jam, of course, is coming up soon. I can still register right now. And until the end of the Game Jam, which is December 5th, I will be donating $1 for every single subscriber I get to the Team C's cleanup efforts. This is, yeah, something that make it hurt, guys. Make it hurt. Like, just, yeah, feel free to abuse that, and it's a free donation for you. Just hit the subscribe button, and you are donating to a good cause. And no, if you unsubscribe and then resubscribe, that does not count. Okay, so what is the high concept? High concept is... You know, I probably should have thought more about how to describe this stuff. The high concept is a bit more focused. It's a bit more detailed. It takes the idea of the elevator pitch, but instead of just going into the real quick and dirty version of it, the super fast, this is what I'm doing, this is what we're going towards, the high concept, it goes into more detail. So just make sure I have everything lined up for everything. There we go. Okay. There. Excellent. So, the high concept is where you more talk about everything that's important to your game, the general overviews, the sort of goals and emotions that you're trying to trigger. Like, the high concept might be something as fairly broad strokes still, like the elevator pitch, but less broad than the elevator pitch. Where the elevator pitch is super quick, concise, get you the words out of your mouth to say what your game is. The high concept is a bit more detailed, a bit more fleshed out. But you want to have both. You want to have both, and you want to have them separate. Because the elevator pitch needs to be as succinct as possible. It needs to be boiled down. It needs to be just very concise. Whereas the high concept is, like, it's still easily pitched and still succinctly stated, but it's something that's more workable. It gives you more detail. Then from there we go into the core gameplay. The core gameplay is just what is the core gameplay loop? What do you do? What is the general idea of the gameplay? What next one blends right into it, but what is the genre? What is the player expected to be doing and feeling? And again, this is still overview stuff. Don't worry about getting into all the tiny details here. Step one is to get the general concepts on the table. And then genre, as I mentioned before, blends right into the core gameplay. Usually these two are sort of combined. But genre is what do you have to... what genres do you fit into? I mean, do I need to explain genre? Like, do we need to get into a description of what genre is? Because, like, is it a first-person shooter? Is it a real-time strategy game? Is it a point-and-click adventure? Just, you know, what is the general concept that someone would describe your game as? But then we go into the target audience. Target audience is, well, more detailed than you might think. Because you might just want to say, haha, target audience gamers. No. Go into marketing style demographics. Your marketing style demographics of exact dates, exact ages, 18 to 24, 25 to 30, people who are familiar with XYZ. If it's a baseball game, people who have played baseball growing up is a different target audience than people who watch professional baseball. Trying to invoke the feeling of a Little League game is different than trying to evoke the feeling of watching a professional game. These are different target audiences. Likewise, the target audience of somebody who wants to be competitive, like if you're making a competitive game and you want to target competitive gamers, well, that's going to be different than someone might make a casual game, even if the game is otherwise the same. Like, you can have the same game that has a competitive scene and a casual scene, and you can end up with a different result depending on what your target audience is, if you want to focus more of your development time on the competitive scene or more on the casual scene. So go into more detail on this. Your target audience is, it's who you're going to market to, it's who you're going to sell to. So you need to have a good idea of who you're going to sell to when you begin your design process, right? If you don't know who you're going to sell to, then how are you going to sell to them, right? How are you going to build a game that they want to buy? So think about this, and again, we'll go into all these things in more detail later on, but the target audience is marketing. It's who are you going to market your game to once it's done. Now I want to pause it right here and say that all these things can change at any time. The game design document is not a Bible. It is not a listing that you put on a shelf and everybody reveres. It is a living and breathing document, and when these things change, you change the game design document to reflect it. So if your target audience pivots for, say, the competitive scene into a casual scene, you make a note of that in the game design document, and yeah, it's the same way you would on a Git upload. Is, you know, just make it a note for the date and say, hey, we're pivoting this in this direction, and that's good and positive. Like, this is not enshrined. Nothing that you make on this is going to be permanent, but having it is very important, so you have a launch pad to work with. So you have something to work with and something to refer to as you're working. Then at this point, I like to make a note of contact info for everybody who's on the team. If it's just yourself, obviously you can ignore this, but having a reference point that everybody has access to access the communication lines for everybody else in the project, which is incredibly valuable. Like, you can't not have that in a way, right? This is incredibly important to be able to say, hey, if you're here, I know where you are. If I can contact you, if we can get in communication, if we can talk, fantastic. Then we get into the game overview itself. The game overview itself... Sec. Also, if you guys want to chip in at any point with your own thoughts, feel free. This is... this isn't a pre-recorded thing. This is a stream. This is me chatting with you guys. Or not. I mean, either way is fine. I'm just mentioning that. Let me slide this down a bit. There we go. So the core overview of the game sounds like it's something that you covered up in the core gameplay. And honestly, a lot of it is the same, except that in the core game overview, you're going to be going into more detail. Again, from the top bottom, from the top down to these sections here, you're getting more and more specific. The core overview of the high concept, the core gameplay, and the core overview is just, each one is more detailed than the previous. And anytime you change something in this, you ask yourself, are we also changing the genre? Are we also changing the core gameplay? Are we also changing the high concept? Are we also changing the elevator pitch? And work your way up and say, hey, is the new idea for the new gameplay overview in conflict with the previous things? And if so, is that a good thing? And is that a good thing? And should we update the previous options? The core overview is where are we? Should also include your win condition, your lose conditions. Should also include your ideas for what's going to make everything more efficient. It's going to improve. Oh wow. Okay, sorry. It's going to get more detail into what your game is. Well, again, now down here you can see we're going to have the actual gameplay section. We're going to have a game layout section. We're going to have an artistic layout section here. So this is going to be split up, and you're going to be going into a lot more detail below. But in the core overview here, this is a longer description of where you are going to be going and what your goals are to accomplish. Next up, story, which may or may not be relevant to your game. Some games don't have a story, but every game takes place in a world. And you will need to make some statement on where your world takes place. So sometimes this might be the longest section. If this is like some giant role-playing game, you might have an entire, novel devoted to the story section. But even something like Counter-Strike, the story is that there is a terrorist threat and there are bombs being placed, and some people are trying to defend them and other people are trying to ensure that they go off. Like, there is still a story element even into something that doesn't have much story. Outside of something like Solitaire, basically every game has some faction of a story. And this is where you put it. This is where we go into detail on what that story is, how it's going to be presented to the player, what elements are going to be told and what elements are not going to be told, or rather don't need to be told. And those things are worthwhile to remember, is that you don't need to tell your entire story to the player. The story is not just for the player, it's also for you. And many good games have a iceberg principle, where you are going in deeper on the... Second here. I am going to... Excellent. I am adding the Gogodot Game Jam server into the description here, and I'll add it to the chat in a moment too. There we go. As someone who writes with aims to turn stories into games or animated shows, I feel like you should be using this sheet to organize things. Absolutely, absolutely. Same thing that you did when you were when you were a kid in school and they had you write an outline for your essays. Like, yeah, no, still write outlines. This is effectively an outline for your game, right? Yeah, what is your world? How does it function? Is it based off of a certain time? How much of the world will affect your gameplay? Yeah, these are all important things. And likewise, going in the next one here is character. And this includes what your character's motivations are, as well as what the player's understanding is of the character. Actually, I want to touch more a little bit on both story and character in regards to Iceberg Design. Iceberg Design, I'm not sure if people are familiar with this phrase, is the idea that you don't have to tell the player everything. You should have the classic view of an iceberg where 80% of it is underwater or whatever. The idea of it is that you don't need to tell the player every single little thing in your world. You should have, but you should know it anyways. You should know everything that's in the world, whether or not the player knows it. Whether or not the players understand what everything else that's in the world, you should know it and have it written down and have it configured so that you can work off of it. Now, sometimes it's hidden from the player so that you can develop new content with this understanding, and then either the player will understand the subtext, like in a game like Fallout, where they have the entire Fallout Bible that gives you a whole bunch of details and focuses that the design team used to write the world, that was never supposed to be released, but the players were supposed to suss out. The players were supposed to figure it out on their own. Or the Iceberg Design is something like Pokemon, where the inspirations and the design origins of many of the characters are never told to the player, but are kept consistent across multiple games and across multiple across the entire franchise, across multiple games, as well as across the entirety of a single game. Remember we talking about wanting to do this panel in the first Gogodot, and you're here for it? Oh, I'm good to have you back, friend. So that's the general idea of Iceberg Design, is that you need to design more than what the player sees to keep yourself consistent. And sometimes this can be adding in underlying elements, and other times it can be adding things that you want to the player to figure out. Either way, it's important to do. But this is where this goes. Environment, every game takes place somewhere, right? Every game takes place somewhere. And I know I said before, you don't really have a character or story in something like Solitaire, but you know what? You have a character, you have an environment in Solitaire. Even in something as simple as Solitaire, you have a very concrete description of where this game is taking place. What is your board layout? What is your environment? What is your background? What sort of card backs do you have? What sort of cards fronts do you have? Is it stylized? Is there a hand when you're dealing out cards, or is there not? Like, even in a game as simple as a Solitaire game, there is an environment. Are you trying to evoke the old retro style of Windows Solitaire for the Windows 3.1, or are you trying to evoke a more modern style of like someone sitting down and playing a game? And figuring that out is important. And for something that's a more, what's a good way to phrase it? For something that's more narrative based, your environment is also going to be your world building. And again, this can be long or short depending on what sort of world you have. But in a horror game, what makes the world terrifying? What is the background of that? Why is the player here is going to be on the character, but where here is and why it is here is relevant, and why being here is relevant to the character and the story and the core overview is important. You don't just drop a player in a system without any thought about why they're there, right? That it's not going to be engaging. It's not going to flow. The audience is not going to engage with it unless you have thought about this. And if once you think about it, you'll find other pieces of your storytelling and other pieces of your gameplay falling together. Like, you don't just put a character in a forest unless you decide where the forest is and why they are in a forest. You can, but it's not going to be interesting. It's just going to be a backdrop. If you take time to determine why they're in a forest, and then iceberg where the forest is, like put into a little bucket where that forest is and what they're going to be doing there, how they got there. Even if the player's never told that, even if that's never relevant to the plot, having that information on the back end will help you understand your game better. And then level overview is, where does the player go between environments? Is everything in one place? Well, then level overview is basically going to be merged with environment. But where does the character go from point A to point B? This is also a good place to have, where the hero's journey is. I mean, honestly, this entire section is where you'd be adding in the hero's journey stuff, whereas, the narrative and the character's growth and development. But the level overview, in the traditional platformer sense, this is, I'm going to go from a nice world into a sewer level. I mean, that's sure, that's fine, and that's where you would add in all the details here, as well as why you have a sewer level, why you are going to here, what is the connective tissue that transitions you from point A to point B. But also going into different styles of genres. Something like God of War, for example. Let's take the God of War remake, the new, not remake, but the new God of War, the Dad of War one. The level overview goes through the different worlds of the Norse mythology, and those different worlds of Norse mythology each have different environments, each have different different characters as well, but the level overview is a section where you can detail why A leads to B, why B leads to C, why C leads to D, and so on. It's the connective tissue. It's the connective tissue between the environments. I suppose there should be environments, and there should be characters, and arguably it could be stories as well, but still, the idea is this is the connective tissue that leads from point A to point B. This is the part of the hero's journey that leads you through the path. Post-apocalypse. What was the apocalypse, and what has it affected? Exactly. And the player might never need to know that. The player might never need to be caring about where the apocalypse was or what it went through, what the world went through. But you need to know so that you can add a world and make it feel more lived in, make it feel more real. Hold on 1 second. I need to grab a beverage. I'll be back in just a second. Beverage acquired. Note from writing: you do not have to be using the hero's journey formula, but it can be helpful in making connections with various steps. My personal opinion on that, like, if you're writing a novel, if you're writing a story, you do not need to use the hero's journey formula. I would argue that if you're writing a video game, you don't have to use the hero's journey, of course. You don't have to, but if you're making a video game, you want to simplify things for the wider player base, and I would argue that you almost always want to use some variation of the hero's journey in a video game. If you have a narrative story, mind you. You don't have much of a hero's journey in Counter-Strike. Hey, if you can figure out a way to make a Valorant or a Counter-Strike with a hero's journey in it, I would love to see it. That would be fantastic. But but if you were making a narrative game, I would argue that effectively using the hero's journey, or knowing the hero's journey well enough that you can say how your narrative subverts it, is very important. If you're not going to use the hero's journey, I would argue, and this might be a hot take, but I would argue that you need to have a reason not to. If you are going to avoid using the hero's journey in a video game, you might actually need to figure out why you are not doing that, rather than just not doing it. Do you see what I'm saying? It's that important to writing. It's that important to writing a consistent narrative, and because of the way the gameplay loops work, that becomes very important. Hero's journey in Solitaire. Hey, I've seen that. I have seen a variation of Solitaire that actually did have a narrative and a hero's journey in it. Like not a very big one, but not like some very significant one. But yeah, no, I have seen a narrative Solitaire. I've seen a narrative Mahjong game too, single player Mahjong, the tile matching one. So yeah, no, it absolutely can be done. Gameplay. What is the conflict? There's a conflict in everything. If there's no conflict, I mean, the definition of conflict will vary wildly. What conflict means to you and your game will vary wildly, but there's going to be some form of conflict, otherwise you don't really have a gameplay. Maybe the conflict is trying to learn more, and even a walking simulator, the conflict is trying to learn more and understand the character or the world or what's going on. In a puzzle game, the conflict is trying to solve the puzzle. Like, what is the puzzle? In Solitaire, the conflict is, can you solve the puzzle before either you hit a lose condition or maybe you hit a timer? Maybe the Solitaire, you're trying to win, yeah, and the conflict sometimes is, can you win? Because Solitaire does have lose conditions, or a timer, or maybe trying to beat your best time from before, something along those lines. What is the basic conflict? Is the conflict, bullet-based, or is the conflict puzzle-based? And having some understanding of that is going to tell you where you're... Sorry, just taking a quick check on thing here. Puzzle Quest. Yeah, Puzzle Quest is a puzzle game that has a full narrative. Great game. Love it. Puzzle Quest 2 is actually the good one. Puzzle Quest 1 was... Anyways. The core gameplay loop. Honestly, we'll probably talk about this a lot more next week, is it? When we have Cheeses and we're going over some more game design stuff. But the core gameplay loop is, what does the player do over and over again? What is the player going to keep on doing? And what is that what are they going to enjoy? What is the player going to keep on doing, and what's going to keep them engaged? What makes that core gameplay loop interesting? In a game like Counter-Strike, the core gameplay loop would be something along the lines of start out, buy weapons, find where enemies are and eliminate them. If you are on the good guys team, then you need to make sure that the bomb is not planted. If you're on the bad guys team, you need to make sure that you plant the bomb. Easy as. And then the advancement would be where you just determine what happens in between rounds, how many rounds are in a set, all the other stuff. Also in the core loop, you should include your playtime. How long is that core loop? In something like a Final Fantasy game, the core loop would be the combat loop. Would be explore, enter combat, fight combat, return to exploration. That's the core loop of the game. That is in the connective tissue between the core loop is the exploration, and the loop connective tissue between the exploration sections is the storyline sections. But the core loop itself, going from engagement to engagement, is only a couple minutes long. It's not a very long core gameplay loop, and it repeats more times than a lot of people enjoy, but that's okay, and not enough times for other people. You know, like different people have different desires, which again links us up back into target audience. Like if your target audience is 5 to 10 years old, you're probably not going to be making an 80-hour JRPG. Or maybe you are. Maybe there's a way of making that work and engaging a younger audience for that long amount of time. Certainly possible. But even something like Civilization or XCOM, which can be, very easily 100-hour games, you still have a core loop of just 5 more minutes, because that's really what just 5 more minutes usually is. I feel like you could do a whole Gamedev stream on story. Honestly, I should. We can talk about that later. That would be a good stream. But yeah. The core loop of a Civilization game is 1 turn. 1 turn can vary in length depending on how many things you need to do, but it's going to be somewhere between, 5 seconds and in the early game and 15 minutes in the late game. The actual core gameplay loop of Civ 6 is usually in that range. Is almost always going to be in that range. Abilities, honestly, I should add in here verbs. Like, this is what you do. How does the player engage with the core gameplay loop, and how does the player engage to resolve the conflict? What do you actively do? What is the things that you do in this game? What are your verbs? Do you move cards around in Solitaire? Do you shoot guns in Counter-Strike? Do you pick up rocks in a walking simulator? Like, maybe you need to pick up rocks until you find the right rock that reminds you of your childhood. I don't know. Like, there's going to be you're going to have some verb. You're going to have something to do. And that's where you put your stuff in here. And again, you will add in sections. Like, this is, again, just a layout. Your verb section, your ability section might be, yeah. Like, you're going to have more subsections to this. So in a JRPG, you have your exploration phase, and your exploration phase is going to be your menuing, your healing, your in-between combat support, as well as your mapping, if you are having a mapping section. Your actions in the combat phase are going to be different, right? It's going to be completely different, because you're probably going to have an entirely different, scene, multiple scenes dedicated towards your combat phase. Actions in the map overworld might be different yet, because that's going to be deciding where you're going and maybe having some meta-analysis of other things to do. And hello Soul, and hello Boca, and hello everybody who is here. I don't think I said hello to everybody in chat yet, but maybe I should do that. Anyways, this leads to advancement. Advancement is just what it sounds like. It's how do you improve whatever it is you're doing. How do you get better as you keep on going? In a game of Solitaire, you gain more knowledge. You gain more understanding of the deck and the deck order, if you're playing 3-card draw Solitaire. In Counter-Strike, your money persisting between rounds is how you determine what your advancement looks like for your team. In a JRPG, or in any RPG, I suppose, it's going to be stat development. It's going to be action development. It's going to be getting better at, at your verbs. And your advancement section here should include all of that. Again, in different sections. Like, this is going to be a long document. Your game design document is going to be a long thing. Just embrace that. Just accept right now that your game design doc is going to be like a whole thing. It's going to have a bunch of information, and then you're going to have to go through it because, well, this is what you're going to be dealing with when you hand it over to your programmers. This is going to be all the details that your artists need to be able to flesh out the world and characters. This is going to be all the information that your artist needs when the artist is looking at the combat phase and how the camera layout is going to be handled. This is going to be all the information that the map overworld is going to tell for everything. Everything's going to be connected to. So if you change one thing, you should at least spend 5 minutes to look at everything else, or at least, skim through the entire document and say, what else does this affect? What other dominoes am I knocking over by changing this one thing? It'll be a 10-page essay easily, especially if you're doing like a AAA, or if you're doing or anything more professional, anything with a larger team, anything with a team over 20 people. This is going to be enormous. But that's when it's even more important. That's when it's critical that everybody is working on the same page. You don't want somebody making a level and somebody else making another level, and then seeing those levels be completely different, and to the point where they don't feel like they belong in the same game. That comes from the players having a different understanding of the environments and the story, and that's where that iceberg comes back into play here. That iceberg that I mentioned before. In the difficulty curve is right after the advancement because it needs to be designed in tandem. Your difficulty curve and your advancement need to work together. Now, if you're in a multiplayer game, you don't necessarily have a difficulty curve in a multiplayer game, but you have some. But if you're in a multiplayer game, you will have some sort of matchmaking consideration. Matchmaking rating or matchmaking ratio, or however you want to whatever terms you want to use. What's the other? ELO. Fun fact: ELO is not actually a abbreviation for anything. I thought one day, like, wait a minute, what is ELO an abbreviation for? And like, I spent. I was on the road, and I spent like a 40-minute drive trying to rack my brains. Like, I should know this. What is ELO standing for? Turns out it's just somebody's name. Like, it's literally just a chess player's named Arpad Elo, who invented the ranking system. So it's called an ELO rating system. It's not actually ELO as an abbreviation. Anyway, that's. But anyways. The difficulty curve should match your advancement. It should match how the characters are going to learn, what they're going to be figuring out, what they're going to be handling, and how you're going to keep the game interesting for them. The difficulty curve might be making the conflict more difficult. Or it might actually just be adding more things to consider. Like, maybe the game isn't getting harder, but the number of things you need to manage is increasing. I'm sure most of you follow Game Maker's Toolkit, and Game Maker's Toolkit did a video recently about Metroid Dread, bringing up how you never have to have as big an area to explore. And I actually disagree with him on here, where he cites that by keeping the area that you have available to explore at a constant level, and by limiting the access to the previous areas, you keep that steady so you don't get overwhelmed. But I think that the difficulty curve of a Metroidvania is the exploration. By increasing the world's size, you increase the number of areas that need to be explored. And by increasing the number of areas that need to be explored, that is the difficulty curve. I mean, Metroid Dread handles difficulty curve in other ways. And I genuinely think it's a phenomenal game. I think Metroid Dread is going to be a game that game designers are going to be studying for years to come. I think that is going to go down as one of the best games of the current era. I genuinely do. But what is difficult? The difficulty curve doesn't just mean making the conflict harder. It can also be adding more things. Civilization is another good example of this. The difficulty curve is the number of things you have to keep track of. You have more cities, you have more army, you have more technologies, you have more things that you need to be looking at any given time. Not any one of those things is actually harder. Not a single one of those things is actually getting harder as you play the game. But you have more things to deal with. You have more civilizations that you need to watch. You have more things that you need to handle. And that is where things come into play. That is where the difficulty curve is defined in some of those different games. So, if you're writing the story, you need to have the gameplay in mind. Yes, you need to have the gameplay. You need to have all these things in mind. All these things cross-reference to everything else. If you don't, the player may end up dropping the game due to it being better suited for a show. Oh, in that case, yes, too, as well. That is almost a separate conversation, but I do agree with that. Where are we here? Yes. Okay. Tutorial. We're going to have an entire separate discussion on tutorialization. Tutorials it's important. You need to be able to break down the difficulty curve in a way that makes sense. And simply put, different games require different tutorials, and different games want different tutorials. And it's going to depend on how high your difficulty curve starts. It's fine to start the game with a high difficulty curve. That's fine. Perfectly fine to start the game with a very high difficulty. But you need to be even more careful with the tutorial then. Because if your difficulty curve starts high, then the tutorial needs to be representative of the whole game. Representative? Representationist. Representative. Representing? Reprehensible? No, that's a different word. It needs to be good. Yes, in Mario, the first level of the tutorial, I mean, there's been 60 billion YouTube videos explaining that one. But, yeah. Another example, I mean, Portal, the entire game is a tutorial. Like, the difficulty curve in Portal is tutorial. Like, you are in a tutorial for literally the 3/4 of the entire game of Portal, right? Like, the only time you finish the tutorial is when you actually leave the testing, get into the back end of the testing center. You're actually in the tutorial the entire time of that game. But that's because the advancement is the tutorial. Or, yeah, is the difficulty curve and the tutorial are all in one thing. The tutorial is the gameplay, in a sense. The tutorial is the core loop. But I want to talk more about having a game with a high starting difficulty curve. Because, let's be honest, Dark Souls has a good tutorial. Dark Souls 1 teaches you very clearly how to play the game and what the game expects of you, without toning down the difficulty. The tutorial in Dark Souls tells you what the game expects of you. You walk into the game, and the game says, hey, we're not messing around, but you can do this. And that's kind of what the entire thing says. The entire game around it says, hey, we're not messing around, but you got this. From the start, it hands you a shield and says, hey, learn to use this, and immediately puts you in a position where you need to learn to use it. Hey, here's an enemy. It's going to gut you. Okay, well, you've learned how dangerous the combat is. You've learned how to defeat that enemy. Hey, there's a boss here, and they're going to obliterate you. And you learn to accept defeat, and you learn to get better at the game. And it works well, because it takes each of these segments out of the whole, puts them aside on a tray, and serves it to the player one at a time. Each of these elements is distinct and individual, and that is why the tutorial works on such a high difficulty game. The tutorial it makes the player confident of the individual segments of playing the game. And you can go too far in this. There's many games where the tutorial is too long or talking down to the player. You don't want to talk down to the player. An example of that, Twilight Princess tutorial is too long and feels like a tutorial. It does, yeah. That's an example of one where the tutorial is overblown. But on the flip side of it, you also have games where the tutorial is not enough. If you used to sit down and right now and start playing Civ 5 with no information background on it, you're gonna burn out real quick because, well, there's so much back-end information. There's so much that you need to pay attention to, and the tutorial just says, hey, here's a bunch of stuff. There's a Wikipedia over here. Go to it. Good luck. Because Civ 5 wasn't actually made for new players. Civ 5 was made for players who played Civ 4. That's the honest truth. Civ 5 was made for Civ 4 players. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because they're expecting players to come in with a certain understanding of the game, but that's why it can be difficult and daunting to new players. Same with Stellaris, same with Orion something. It's Paradox, I think. I make it. I'm gonna have to look this up. I need it. Sorry, I just have to immediately look this up, or it's going to it's gonna annoy me forever. Masters of Orion. That's what I'm thinking of. I was thinking of Masters of Orion. That's NGD. You started playing Civ 5 with no prior knowledge? How did it feel? Like, genuinely, I actually want, let's talk about that. How did it feel to start playing Civ 5 with no prior knowledge? Confusing but true statement. A tutorial shouldn't feel like a tutorial. It shouldn't. And that's where I think Dark Souls it really shines, is that Dark Souls tutorial feels like it's just the first level. Despite being a very good tutorial, it feels like it's just another level in the game. Then on the flip side, you have something like Blood Dragon, Far Cry Blood Dragon, where the tutorial is a mockery of tutorials, which is sort of what I was talking about before with the story, with not using the hero's journey. If you're not gonna have if you is understanding why that tutorial is what it is, rather than simply not having a tutorial, using it, using it in an interesting way, using it as a subversion. That's the word I'm looking for. We'll go into more in tutorials later. We will touch on tutorials a lot more later, I assure you. It was a lot better since you were playing with a friend. Yes. That is an interesting consideration. Playing with a friend always just changes what you're doing drastically. Playing with a friend is almost the intentional way of playing it, isn't it? Every once in a while you had a, wow, I should not have done that thing a while ago moment. Yeah. Because you don't understand what you're doing wrong yet. You're at a point in the game play where you don't understand the mistakes that you're making, and that can be frustrating for a lot of players. This is all important stuff, and because many of these things are things that I could talk about for hours, I'm not going to go into it much further. We can keep it moving. We're going to go into this much, much further, but not right now. Okay. Game layout. This is just more focus on what the game is. What is the camera setup? What is the perspective of the player? Are you top-down view? Are you first-person view? Are you looking at a table? Is the table an abstraction, like for Candy Crush? Are you looking at a abstraction of a table? How is your game going to present itself to the player? This ties very much to down here with visual themes and UI and menuing. But camera setup is what is the viewpoint of the player? And deciding this early can help you because this is going to have a cascading effect. Like many of the other things that we've had, many of the other things that we've discussed here, there's a cascading effect where the camera layout is going to be dictated by and going to dictate other elements of this. The camera setup is going to dictate some of the visual themes. It's going to dictate the majority of the UI and menuing, and it's going to be dictated by the conflict in the core gameplay loop. And the core gameplay loop is dictated by, well, the core overview and the characters and environments, and probably the level. Like, all these things tie together. If you change one thing, pay attention to what the cascades are. And that doesn't mean don't change things. Do not make that your takeaway. The takeaway is that this is not an enshrined document. You don't have, a single God-granted game dev document that is where all of your hopes and dreams come from. This can change and should change and naturally will change, but you want to change this when you change something on your and sometimes you can come up with new designs in the middle of coding. Like, I've had that happen. You can, right in the middle of coding something, you might make a mistake, or you might make an epiphany and say, wait a minute, this rules. Great. Fiddle around with it, test it, and then talk with your team and say, hey, I had an idea. What if we I was playing with the camera setup, and I realized that I accidentally panned out the camera at one point. Panning out the camera actually made it more interesting. I don't know. This is just a theoretical. And then you might decide, okay, well, cool. We'll have to add that to the tutorial. Camera distance might actually be a part of the difficulty curve. Should we add that as an ability? Is that going to be a part of the core loop? Do we need to adjust anything here? Huh. Well, we need to rework some of the environments if the camera is going to be panning out wildly at different points in the game. Okay, sure. Does that change our genre at all? Does that change any of our considerations for our target audience? Look at the knockback effects of the things you do. Do change things. But think about what you're changing and understand what you're changing and understand why these things are changing over time. Does that make sense? Do you guys follow what I'm saying? Game controls. This ties, again, up here to abilities and verbs. This is how you control those abilities and verbs. This is simultaneously obvious and really not obvious. Okay. The game controls is how you do things, right? And how you do things ties to your abilities and your verbs. And your abilities and verbs tie both into your core loop and your genre. Somebody who picks up your game who has an expectation of genre is going to come preloaded with not only an understanding of what the game what is going to play like, but also a muscle memory. Think about that. Your player is going to come with a baked-in muscle memory for that genre. If you're playing a 4X game, the players are going to recognize a hex grid and recognize what combat looks like on a hex grid, and may already understand how some optimal combat can be done before they've even seen any single character stat or played your tutorial. If you're playing a platformer, and there's a good chance that the player already knows how to play a platformer and has played dozens before. And if you're going to subvert the controls, you need to have a reason. And you probably do. You could very easily have a reason. I played on the channel Ghost 1.0. Pretty good game. I enjoyed it. Very interesting. It's a platformer. It's a Metroidvania platformer. Here's the thing. Jump is R1. That took some real getting used to. And I'm like, why is jump on R1? I have played so many platformers. I have my Mega Man muscle memory. I have muscle memory baked into me all the way back to playing Mega Man 3 on the NES. I have muscle memory baked into me all the way back to playing Castlevania. Like Symphony of the Night for hundreds of hours. And you expect me to learn that R1 is jump? And then I played the game more and I understood why. Because that was the real epiphany. The real epiphany for me was why R1 is jump. Because you have 360 degree aiming on the right trigger. Or on the right analog stick. So your left hand is managing your character's location. Your right hand is managing your character's aim as if you're playing a twin stick shooter. But because it's still a 2D platformer, you still need to jump. And if jump is on A, like it is in most platformers, guess what you don't have? You don't have the ability to aim while jumping. You can't aim while jumping if your jump is on A and your aim is on the right analog stick. It took a long time to get used to, friends, but once I understood why it was done that way and once I understood how it was handled, it made a lot more sense. And I was like, okay, no, I get it. I can vibe with this. Right analog stick aiming, left analog stick moving, and my button up here for jump. Okay, cool. And that was a conscious decision made. So player controls should be specific to your game. Most of your player controls are going to be dictated from genre. It does. Most of your gameplay is going to be dictated by genre. But you need to understand the specifics to your game. What are your verbs and how do you need to lay that out in a way that makes sense to your players? Do I think that having button remapping options is a good idea? I think it is absolutely essential. You need button remapping options in your game. Not in your game jam game. It doesn't actually... Okay. Caveat, I'm talking about development. I'm not necessarily talking about game jams. Game jam, you just need to have what you have and do your best with it. But in a professional development situation, you need to actually have remapping for accessibility. You will have players who don't have index fingers, who only have thumbs. And if your only method of shooting is the right trigger, guess what those players can't do? Those players, might need to do something else. This is just, an example, but like, you'll have players with accessibility options. You'll have players who are one-handed but still are very good at video games. I forget his name, but there's a speedrunner. Keep in mind, speedrunners play games at the highest tier. The speedrunners play the games with precision and excellence beyond any of your other target audience. And there's a speedrunner who plays games one-handed because he only has one hand. And you know what? He needs remapping. He needs to remap everything. And he does, and it works well. It works fantastic. There's nothing wrong with that. It's fantastic. You need to be able to have accessibility options. Honestly, I should probably add accessibility just in here as... yeah, I'm just going to add this as a subsection here. And if you're on PC, there's no reason not to. If you're on PC, there's literally no reason that you shouldn't be adding remapping. Like, if you're on mobile, I think mobile is the only real section where you don't need to be able to remap your controls, right? If you're on mobile, then yeah, okay, you have a pretty... Oh yeah, that's how you spell that word. If you're on mobile, then you have a pretty good excuse of why you don't need to remap anything. But even then, being able to move some of the buttons around on your screen for your verbs might still be a good idea. That might still be a worthwhile idea. It might still be a good idea to have that option for players who need it, for players who have a bad spot on their phone, or for players who have a icon on their phone that they need to see at all times. Maybe they have like a timer or a notification window on their phone that is open, or even a bezel, a bevel. That's actually a really good point. If your phone has a bevel, or some PC laptops have a bevel where your camera is, so you effectively have functionally dead pixels. Well, what if you have a button there? That can be bad. And colorblindness, absolutely. Colorblindness is one of those things that's not hard to account for, but super important. Especially because you'd be surprised how many streamers are colorblind. I didn't know this until fairly recently, but a lot of streamers, like a surprising number of streamers, are colorblind, and the more obvious line is that a unsurprising number of people who watch streamers are colorblind, and being able to show content to them in a way that they can understand is important. Accessibility is another thing that I feel like we could do an entire stream on. Game modes, is there alternate styles of play? Is there alternate options and paths that players can do? And player count. I mean, this is another one of those things that seems obvious at first until you start to work with it. Like, you know, you might have maybe making a one-player game and then learn halfway through the game, wait a minute, this rules as a two-player game. A good example of that is Sniper Elite. Sniper Elite is a single-player game until you realize that it plays better as a two-player game. So they turned around and said, okay, cool, yeah, we can work with this. They added a two-player option, so you can have two snipers, or they can actually play a sniper and spotter. Have one person with a have one person who has binoculars and can mark targets, and the other person with the actual rifle. They pivoted from a single-player game into a two-player game. And it works fantastically for the game, honestly. It genuinely does. But knowing how many players you're going to have is good. And then hours of gameplay is the overarching idea of how long is the total game. How long is the total game for the players? Artistic layout, visual themes. Now we're going back up to this second section with the story, characters, and environments. Visual themes. What emotions are you trying to evoke? Likewise with story. What emotions are you trying to evoke with the story? Is it a story of triumph? Is it a story of revenge? Is it a tragedy? Is it a story of reclaiming lost glory, or is it a story of glory being lost? And some, like, what are you going for? And this section should, if you're filling this out in order, honestly, this section here, artistic layout, should probably be done before you get into your overview. But yeah, having your visual themes, saying this is a generally dark game with moments of triumphant brightness, or maybe this is a cartoony game that's modeled after XYZ. Like, what are your inspirations? Don't be afraid to add images to your document. It will mess up if you, like, I'm working on Microsoft Word or something. It will mess up your formatting. Embrace it. Embrace the messed up formatting. And just accept it. Add in what you're doing here. Add in images, add in your vision boards. If you're an artist, you should know what a vision board is. It's just a list of inspirations and things that are adjacent in theme to what you are working on. And having that on hand is good. Like, having that in your game design document for everybody on the team to reference is good. And that's something that's something you want to iron out early on in development. Going from single player to multiplayer adds a high level of complexity to your project. It absolutely is. But you still need to, this is part of hammering that out and, coming to that realization and understanding as early as possible by having your game design document completed and keeping it malleable. But it's something that is absolutely something you want to iron out very early on. Genre as well, you want to iron out. Now you want some genres do not work well with certain art styles. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that just about any genre can work with just about any art style. I've seen very cartoony RTS and very gritty, realistic RTS. I've seen point-and-click adventures games that range from the Saturday morning cartoon feeling of Sam and Max Freelance Police all the way to the literal H.R. Giger-inspired storytelling of Darkseid, both in point-and-click adventure games. I don't think there's really a genre that doesn't work with an art style inherently. You might have some difficulty. You might have to figure out, make sure that everything is consistent and make sure that everything is going to work together. But you could you have things like Cuphead, which is, the painfully difficult style of game with a cute 1930s, 1940s style art style. I think there is very much a possibility for just about any genre and just about any art style, if you plan ahead and if you design around it, if you plan from the beginning. Has anyone else played Darkseid? Real talk, Darkseid is good. You've seen cartoony art styles that are horror games. I mean, Five Nights at Freddy's is a cartoony style horror game. I mean, that's very famous. Like, that's a very famous example of a very cartoony style being used for pure horror. UI and menuing is going to be full of images. That's going to be full of sketches. Always, make sketches before you make anything else. And honestly, at the beginning of the game, even before you have put pen to paper on a single line of code or anything else, you can start some general ideas of UI and menuing, at least to say, what do we need to know? What does the player need to know? What information does the player need to know? And what information does the player not need to know? What information do we deliberately want to hide from the player? What information do we explicitly not want the player to have? It's something you have to decide. It's something that you need to, discuss. Yeah, don't settle for the first thing you've drawn. Of course, absolutely. But do draw something first. Like, you need to iterate on things. Make something, and then make something that's based off of the previous thing, and keep on working on that path until you have something that is wonderful. And then audio, of course, goes a win with all this other stuff here. Where your visual themes and your story themes will determine your audio themes. Your use of leitmotif, your absence or presence of audio. Is the audio diegetic or not? I'm not going to go into a full discussion of diegesis, but does the audio come from in-game sources, in-world sources, like radios or earbuds or something of that nature? Is the ambient audio from an orchestra and organs maybe? Or is the audio non-diegetic? Is the audio just something that exists in the player's brain? For the player. That's getting more into... If you're an audio designer, you know what I'm talking about. Then NDA and legal. I feel that it is a very good idea to have your NDA documents in your game design documents. That's more of a my style thing. I don't know if you want to do that, but I find it useful. It's sort of like keeping the team members section in the game design document. Is this technically a part of your game design document? No, not really. But it's so valuable to have in the same document that everybody has, that everybody is being shared with. Likewise, having your NDA and your legal in here as well, I think is very valuable. I think that's a very good way of handling it. So, why is this like that? Why do it be like this? There we go. There's still an extra page here. I don't need an extra page here. There we go. Okay, so. Let me check in with chat real quick. You love the cartoony art styles of horror games? American McGee's Alice. Yeah, no, that's a very good example. Again, Five Nights at Freddy's. Like, yeah, and if you need to make your genre and art style consideration deliberate. It's a choice that needs to be decided upon. But I don't think there's a wrong answer there if you're willing to go through the audio and sound design, if you're willing to go into the story themes, if you're willing to go into the visual themes to make sure it's well established. You see what I'm saying? I don't think there's a wrong answer as long as you actually genuinely decide on the answer. So the reason I have this twice, I have this here, and then I have it again, because this, in an actual game design document, these would be all links. Oh, that's actually hyperlinks. How do I do? I don't know. These would be internal links. So project overview would link down to project overview here, which should be here. Not sure why that wasn't there, but it is now. Hooray! Play that one. Music can absolutely carry a game. Can absolutely carry an emotional state. Can carry a tone for a game, and honestly, it should. Like, that's a good way of handling things. So, why is that? Okay, we're gonna do it this way. There, perfect. Beautiful. I love it. Okay, so a game concept was discussed in my last game dev stream. Well, actually, it was my Team C's stream on environmentalism. The idea was the elevator pitch general idea. So we're going to make this together. This is going to be a project for all of us. This is a game, and I will actually start with NDA and legal here and just say that there is no NDA, and legally, anybody may use this idea to make a game. Anybody may use this entire game design document to make this their own reality, and I officially relinquish any individual holding rights to what we work on in this stream specifically, and nothing beyond. So, the idea was the elevator pitch was a very quick, needs to be short, it's concise. The idea was players play as a nature spirit What? What? What's going on? Yeah, what? Okay. Sure. Okay, that's fine. I don't know what just happened. It's fine. Google having a hiccup. Gotta love it. Yes, live recordings. What can you do? An example of how music can influence atmosphere in the movie Halloween. The movie was seen without John Carpenter's music and was found to be boring. John's music changed that. Yeah. Star Wars. The music carries Star Wars. Like, the leitmotif of Star Wars is phenomenal. Some early Final Fantasy games, like the leitmotif and musical style really helps you understand what's going on in the game. Okay, so player plays with a nature spirit with intention of destroying and reclaiming the natural lands. There's a real quick elevator pitch. Now, we can go into more than that, and there should be more in there. So we're just bringing up what was discussed before, which was the player plays as a nature spirit with the intent of destroying and reclaiming the natural lands. As the player reclaims certain aspects of the wilds, they unlock new powers and civilizations become stronger and more aggressive in trying to industrialize them. There. So let's work with this. High concept. So there's our elevator pitch. This is a real quick, snappy thing that immediately gets someone to listen. You play as a nature spirit with the intent of destroy. It's the anti-factorio. This is actually what was discussed before. This is the anti-factorio. It takes the idea of or satisfactory, I think was the one, but I don't know. I think those are kind of the same game. Just one has more dimensions, literally. Yeah, the idea is that instead of taking the colonist idea of we're going to destroy the nature and build and pave it and build new factories for more progress and growth, it's flipping that on its head and saying we are playing as a nature spirit and reclaiming the land for nature. Very easy, very quick. Okay, so what's our high concept? Well, you guys help me out with this. Give me a couple lines. Actually, let me put it over to a really old thing that I had. Here's one for a cyber espionage. Actually, I have a proper name for this. I do not. This actually is my intellectual property and is not going to be. Does not pertain to that previous legal commentary that I made before. Sounds like an opposite tower defense. That's a cool concept way of handling it. So this is for a tabletop game. Each player has 2 health bars, health and tech. Different weapons attack different stats. Tech is on average half of health. If you reduce your opponent's tech to 0, you immediately gain control of that model and can make an activation. That model is not available for your opponent's next turn. Say it takes average 2 turns to take tech. Using 2 activations, you get +1 activation. This is actually more... This is actually less elevator pitchy and more core gameplay. Target audience, players of Infinity, Arkham, and Skirmish-style games, as well as Shadowrun. This is just some stuff that I had worked on, with gameplay going into a heavy breakdown of dicing and all that fun stuff. Okay, so, high concept. So what is our high concept here? How, because we haven't even figured out genre, right? We still need to figure out what genre this is going to be and what the core gameplay looks like. Because right now, with this elevator pitch, this could be a tower defense game, kind of. This could be a tower... There's an idea, a tower defense game where you play as the minions, as the creeps, as the balloons. I say balloons because I play a heck of a lot of Balloons Tower Defense because I really like that game. Anyways. But this could just as easily be a third-person action game. This could just as easily be a RTS. I mean, RTS actually would make a lot of sense for this style as well. Tell me about ice towers. Well, you see. No, that's an inside joke on my Discord. Anyways. Feed me a high concept. Let's run this down. High concept is... Like, this is, what is the succinctly stated premise of the game? Give me a premise. The premise is, nature spirits are real and are being hurt by expanding factories. Honestly, this could probably go into the elevator pitch. The elevator pitch can be longer if we want it to be. You think a third person would be neat, or a first person would have a more feral approach? Yeah, I think that would be a very interesting way of handling it. Nature spirits are real and are being hurt by expanding factories. A game like Okami, where you fight to reclaim the land for nature. That's a cool idea too. I need to play it more. I play a bit of Okami, but I never actually finished it. Maybe I'll do that on the channel sometime. It's an idea. So what tools does the player have? So there's the next question is, what tools would the nature spirit have to reclaim land? Honestly, this is also heavily influenced by Spirit Island. Spirit Island is a fantastic board game, by the way. Highly recommend. Honestly, genuinely one of the best designed board games I've ever played. Okay. You know, let's just run this down as a third person. Yeah. Plant and vine growth. That makes sense. Can send minions and animals down at enemies. Maybe a 4 elements type progression. You start out with one basic element and gain others as you progress. Okay, that's a neat idea. So if we're doing in that path, I do think that I like the idea of unlocking things as you conquer more options. So let's take this here and then add in the concept of yes, one thing I did like that was discussed in the previous stream. But Captain Planet, yes. If we're doing Captain Planet, we have to have heart. Heart is clearly one of the elements. That is established Captain Planet lore. Okay. I wonder how hard it would be to get the Captain Planet license for a game in the year of our Lord 2021. You know what? Okay, hold up. Now we're going on a bit of a pivot here, but who owns the Captain Planet license? This TBS Turner Broadcasting System do they still own it? If they do, you could probably get that license without too much expense. I mean, Hanna-Barbera is down, of course. And Deke, I believe, is down. But the distributor was TBS. Oh, no. Okay, yeah. Deke is still around. Yeah, TBS is went defunct then. But they still are owned in part by... Anyways. Yeah, they're Warner Brothers. Okay, Warner Brothers. Yeah, Warner Brothers you can buy a license from. This is a complete tangent. I just immediately love the idea of making an actual official Captain Planet game out of this. Anyways. Sounds like a good game for the last Go-Go Game Jam. Growth. You know what? That checks out. Option for darker paths such as decay or mold. I mean, honestly, I think that would work in line with the plant and vine growth. Anyways. As new various reclaim the wilds, you unlock new powers appropriate to those regions. I think that this is very good way of handling that. There's a real quick high concept. We'll take this 4-element progression in heart into a later section. I do like that idea, and in fact, honestly, the more I think about it, I don't actually think Captain Planet would be a great IP to pull this from, but it would be hilarious. Snow powers in more Arctic regions. Oh, okay. That would be... We can add that when we get into environments. There. We'll just make a note of a couple of different environments. So what's the core gameplay? What is the basic gameplay that we're looking for? We're looking at in genre, we're looking at a third-person action adventure mostly right now, from the sounds of it. Though obviously, this could also still work as RTS. But a lot of the elements we have sound like they would work well in the third-person action category. Doesn't have to be, though. Actually, it wouldn't be RTS exactly. It would be what's the name for a Diablo-style game? A top-down, not a MOBA, because it wouldn't be multiplayer. But what is the name for that? ARPG. Thank you. That is exactly what I was trying to think of. Thank you very much. Mess with the trees and I'll cap your knees. I love it. It's fantastic. Thank you, Draco. That's fantastic. Run around and cleanse the pollution in nature environments while fighting the automaton enemies that are causing the destruction. Yeah, that also comes into story. Actually, I'm just going to literally copy what you wrote here. Because that actually sounds like it's a really good description of what we're doing here. That's not things. That should be natural. Thank you, Google. Thank you. I got it. Yeah, we're somewhere between like Okami and the Lorax, and you know what? I am here for it. I'm 1000% here for this. But let's back up here real quick. Core gameplay. And also, I do like the idea of having the enemies be robotic. I forget who said that in chat, but I like that idea, that make the enemies automatons. That way you're not fighting humans exactly. So let's, in character, add a note there. I just put a question mark at the end of anything that is very up in the air. Now, because we're very early on in development, everything is up in the air. Because this is the beginning of things, then we can just put a question mark at the end of anything that we're not solid on. Like, we can be solid on most of this. But third-person action adventure, with the idea of, is this a thing? Is this an option? Adding a question mark there just as a quick note. So what's our target audience? Target audience, honestly, for something like this would probably be, say 20 to 35. I mean, it's a really broad target. Environmentally minded. How would we appeal to a mainstream audience? Nature characters are also warm and inviting. Automata do have the cool factor. That is true. That's something that we were discussing before, is that the danger of having the enemies seem too cool. But I think, yeah, we could, and there's various ways we could do it artistically to make them look clunky, to make them just take away some of these sharp, cool lines and make them look a bit more jagged, make them look a bit more dangerous. We're not, yeah. Make them look bulky and bulldozery, maybe. So, decide from a list of regions, attack that region, destroy the opposition infrastructure. Return to the wilds to unlock new abilities. Choose a new region to conquer. That actually is the core gameplay loop. Let's go down here and put that in the core loop. That's the core gameplay loop. And then in the subsection of that is going to be the combat loop, which is going to be let's go. Let's just solidify now this is going to be a third-person action game. But combat is going to be start at a level entrance. This could be more open world, but too. So this is flexible. We can make this into a more open world option, or we can make it into a more linear option. But right now, we're just going to say this is going to have a level's going to have a start and an end. Rather than saying mankind here, we can abstract it. Rather than saying, what do you think the combat style is near as? Near would be exactly what we're describing here. Well, in general combat style, it would be the. Oh yeah, that's my references. Would be the third-person action adventure. That would be encompass the Nier style, the Monster Hunter style, the Bloodborne style. The God of War style. Scarlet Nexus. Sorry. Yeah. Automata can't think for themselves, perhaps? I mean, fair. Okay, so, make your way to the end, removing any trace of the automatons. You know what? There's an idea. There's a story idea. How does that sound? It's to oppose a Grey Goose scenario. There is most of humanity being wiped out by robots. The robots are pushing deeper into the wilds, creating factories. And, yeah, we can work with that. That's an interesting angle. That's an interesting story angle. You see how I'm jumping around here? As I get ideas that follow into certain things, I'm dropping down into that segment and adding it there. Creating factories. What else are they creating? What else are they creating? Creating factories, buildings, and extracting materials. Sure. Which makes the enemy automata. So we actually want to have also here the player. Is a nature spirit. Started as a wood spirit. That makes sense. Because if we're going to have these various environments, then starting out with a wooded area would make a lot of sense. Actually, the mountain might make more sense because that's an area that is notoriously difficult for to develop on, which would be more of a safe hold for a nature spirit, right? The mountain could be the safe hold starting area. We'll go into... So where does... Yeah. And down here, let's... So we already have the core loop. The conflict is... Ooh, I just had a really good idea. Let me take this... Let me finish typing this out, and then we can go into here. There we go. Where is it? As the player pushes deeper into... As the player handles certain regions... The other regions grow more powerful because they've had more time to develop. If the player can decide the order of taking on various regions, all other regions will advance because they're becoming more developed, right? So as you take down one area, well, all the other places that you ignored become stronger, so that also gives you a lot of replayability. That's something that you saw done to a very strong effect in Into the Breach. Into the Breach, when you stopped focusing on a certain area and started going into other areas, well, the areas that you didn't do at the beginning become stronger. Actually, yeah, I see what you're saying there about adding an ocean, but I think Seaside would probably cover that. You know, in Hades, how he has flames under his feet that disappear after a bit, you could do the same with grass and flowers. Absolutely. Absolutely, that's fantastic. That would go under character. That would actually go down in visual themes, really. The Miyazaki's Forest Spirit does that. If you've seen Princess Mononoke. In Princess Mononoke, when the Forest Spirit walks through, every time it steps on the ground, dozens of flowers spring to life at its feet because that's its nature. And that could be a visual theme that would be fill out everything else. So you see how we filled out a bunch of this? You see how we filled out a wide swath of this design here? We have, just from this general initial concept, just from this elevator pitch, we've extrapolated out what the high concept will be. We've extrapolated out what the core gameplay is going to be. We figured out the genre that would fit the core gameplay, and I do think that we can take out the ARPG now. We need to figure out more of our target audience. Mainstream players of God of War, let's say. It's not a bad idea to target a specific player. It's not a bad idea to say, hey, we do want to target somebody who is playing this. Now, you don't want to make that your bread and butter. That's a problem in the tabletop industry that I've discussed before. I've discussed before that in tabletop industries, you get a real genuine problem of people saying, well, we want to target players of this game. Like, what's this? The hecking football game. It's gonna bug me. Hold on. I know I'm pausing to look up things, but deal with it. There was a game. This is going to. Okay, there's a game that is a type of football, soccer game that very heavily focused on pulling War Machine players away. It explicitly was designed from the ground up to target the players of a different tabletop game. And that was a bad thing, frankly. That was just their core design was, okay, what if we rip players from this other specific game? You don't want to go that specific. Now, if we say mainstream players of God of War and / Dark Souls, now we have, the kind of themes of what kind of player we want to look at, what kind of player we want to appeal to. Don't go overboard on the target audience and say, I'm only trying to take players who have played, who have played XYZ. Not Blood Bowl. Blood Bowl is American football. It's... Hold on. I know how to look it up now. I have some of the models. I own some of the models. Why do I not? Guild Ball. Guild Ball, that's the one. Guild Ball, the tabletop game, was targeted surgically to take War Machine players and get them to play their game instead. And it was limited because it wasn't actually getting new players into the hobby. It wasn't actually targeting players who want, in general. It was actually specifically targeting War Machine players and saying, "Hey, War Machine players, play this game instead of War Machine," because you're probably disillusioned by Privateer Press's recent work. And yeah, no, honestly, enough people were to support their game, but it was so hyper focused on fixated on that specific audience that it felt like it was weaker in other areas. I don't know. That's basically, if you're trying to make a game that only appeals to Dark Souls players, then you're going to be making a Dark Souls clone, and the clone is probably not going to match the quality of the original, right? Like the clone is not going to be the same as the original, so you need to stand out. Your target audience is a guide, but don't make it a template. You know, you have to make it unique enough that you stand out and that you are interesting. But no, Guild Ball was the one I was thinking of. I felt like it wasn't trying too hard to be War Machine. It was trying too hard to take War Machine players. There's a huge problem in tabletop industry where everybody's trying to get other tabletop players to play their game instead of their current game, instead of actually trying to get new players to play tabletop games. Like, unless your name is Game Workshop or Fantasy Flight, nobody is trying to get new tabletop players into the field, which is something I discussed before. Look up my there's a stream where I spill the tea on tabletop design. There's actually a lot of good information in that stream. That was a good stream. Anyways, okay. So we have these various environments. Level overview would be going into the environment and adding details to it. Abilities. Let's rock out some abilities. Basic attacks. Honestly, these should be a bit of diversity. These should have a bit of varying options, so for different playstyles. If you only have one playstyle, then you can be more limiting. Like, even something like Dark Souls, you have the greatsword gameplay, you have the daggers gameplay, you have the short sword gameplay, you have the longsword gameplay, you have the archery gameplay, you have the magic gameplay. You have a lot of options. And that was my problem with Scarlet Nexus, which, if you've seen my playthrough of that, you'll know how disillusioned I was, is that there was only one gameplay option and there was no way you could play the game differently. And if that gameplay option isn't laser targeted towards what you want to do, then the player might not have as much fun as they would otherwise. Or maybe they will, or maybe you have enough diversity in your basic gameplay, or maybe you have enough features in it that you can. God of War only has 2 gameplay styles, and one of them isn't unlocked until halfway through the game. But it still works very well for its style of game. Scarlet Nexus only has 1 gameplay style, and never really unlocks a second that you can switch to in the middle of a game, and it ends up feeling very samey and repetitive. 2 games that approach the same angle, and one succeeded, one failed. So we need some sort of diversity of basic attacks. Let's say that we have, I'm going to call it Dagger. Dagger, Scythe, Sword, Axe, and what's another? Oh yeah, ranged options. And Summon. So the Dagger is not actually going to be daggers. That's just a reference to the style. So Dagger is going to be quick, strike, low damage, close range. Scythe is long range, high damage, slow attack. Sword, mix. Axe, mix. Sword, mix, favoring. Speed, mix, favoring damage. And then ranged and summon are fairly self-explanatory. Ranged requires a lot of work to figure out. What would have like a wide range attack? Yeah. Actually, I suppose we could also add in magic, which would be more, which would include that. Wide area. I think a vine attack would be the scythe. So keep in mind, these are not actually the weapons we'd be using. These are the archetypes of the weapons we'd be using, because the abilities right here is more about what is the general concept of the attack. When you're actually making the game, you will make all these abilities. Honestly, this would probably go into artistic layout for in visual themes, or maybe just even under here. Maybe you could even just go into here and say represented by quick jabbing motions. Represented by a wide vine slash. This is where you go into into more detail. The vine you think would be being used like a whip, like Kratos' Chainblade. Yeah, actually that's a fantastic point. Emulate the arc of Kratos' Chainblades. And your final game, you're not going to want to crib exactly Kratos' Chainblades, of course. You want to make it your own game. But this is where you can add in your inspiration pieces here. This is where you can add in your notes for what is going to be inspired by different things. Magic and summons both should be accessible. Accessible regardless of primary weapon type. Yes, I probably do mean this word. Fine. You know what? I want the space and type. You know what, Google? No. That's how I'm spelling type now. I'm keeping it. You can't stop me. What are you going to do? Huh? You can't stop me from doing that. Summon. These two should be accessible regardless of primary weapon type. So if your primary weapon is ranged, maybe you should be able to summon melee options. Actually, you know what? These should probably be Trinity. Summon Trinity summons. So you can summon a bear to be a tank for you, or a bird, which would be functionally a ranged attacker, or a DPS, or summon wolves to be melee DPS, or maybe summon something that would heal you. What would a good healing creature be? Probably maybe. What would a good healing? Honestly, it would probably be a plant beast. So let's say. Bird or insect swarm. And for support, we could have what? Oh, whatever. We don't have to refill everything. So, heal with honey from bees? Sure. I mean, any one of these is going to have, a whole bunch of extra stuff on it. Like, yeah. And you might even have a supplementary document. You might even have the section for abilities and basic attacks might even branch off into a separate entire document that might have 1,000 other pages. There's going to be so much here. Advancement we'll go into next, I suppose, because why not? Just imagine having a stick or a branch for a swinging weapon. Sure. Ooh, I like that. I like that Fey. Although I guess it wouldn't so much be Fey. It would be more. Ooh, Will-o'-the-Wisp. That would work. Yeah, having a Will-o'-the-Wisp that can heal. But we can just have put add slash fey. Something that has a more magical aspect that can yeah, provide support. So sword. I mean, like, the important thing is that you guys are understanding where we're going here. Sure, yeah, the shambling plant slash tree ant it would be as a healer, or maybe it's a tank. Maybe, I don't know. And then where do we unlock various things? So advancement based on what structures were defeated the previous mission, based on the focus of the previous mission. You know what? That's a better way of handling it. Instead of saying what structures are defeated, each mission reveals its rewards before selected. So maybe one mission says, "Hey, you're reclaiming a lake and purifying the lake by purify." What do you want with this? Before being selected? No, I don't want. No, I want before selected. No, no, no. Ignore that. No, I want it saying this way. Heck you. Yeah, each mission reveals its rewards before being selected. So maybe one mission says it unlocks the wolves. Another mission says it gives increased attack speed, which is going to be very valuable for the daggers who already have a high attack speed. Maybe one increases damage, which increases the damage you do on melee attacks. Doesn't help a ranged attacker, but maybe it would be useful for the axe user. Like that would give an option for for the advancement. And this is what goes into making it. And this is the general idea. I mean, we're more or less rounding out on the length of the stream. This is about as much as I wanted to get forward. But I wanted the idea here. I wanted you guys to see how these things link together. How this outline here is used. It's not linear and it's not stagnant. As you work on things, as you do more in your process, you figure out other areas that need things. Like as you work on your highest concept, you figure out aspects of your core gameplay. Figuring out your genre is going to influence your camera position, is going to influence your conflict, and figuring out the environments will help navigate the story, or maybe the story helps navigate the environments, but they're tied together. Everything in here is tied together. And having something that you can work with, and having something that you can refer to, and that everybody on your team can refer to, is incredibly useful. And I hope that you guys can see that. I hope you guys have gotten a lot out of this. As regions are rescued, could end up facing more new enemy types in that area. Or not rescued, yeah. That's kind of what I was mentioning earlier with advancement, or with a difficulty curve. Yep. I think I mentioned something of that vein. Yeah, a player can decide the order of taking regions. All others will advance. I put that in story, but you're right. After I finished typing that in story, I should have scrolled down and added that to difficulty curve, because that's where that tie-in is. That's where that linking is. That's where the connective tissue is in the development. And finding that connective tissue between the different components, between the different thoughts, between the different plans, between the different organizational parts, finding the story themes and putting it into the advancement, finding the camera setup and seeing how that is reflected in your verbs, finding your character and finding how your character determines your genre, or even or everything. What everything is linked together. I guess I can leave it on the screen. But yeah, no, this is what the stream is. I mean, we're coming up to a wrap. We're going to wrap in about 5 minutes, and I'm going to take questions. If anyone has any questions or thoughts on the process, not on the specific game that we're working here, but questions on the process, please ask. This is what we're going here. And if you're watching this after it's live, feel free to ask in the comments. In fact, please, just everybody comment and like and subscribe and push all the buttons that make me happy as a YouTuber. Yeah, again, for every subscriber I get over the course of this month, I will be donating to Team Trees. I am going to be playing some various games on the channel, as I usually do. For this month, I'm going to be playing Godot games mostly. And as we go into... Scott, here, can you explain it again? Absolutely! Okay, so... Yeah, I mean, just to get to recap. I'm going to take this as a serious question. Sure, I'm going to do a quick, couple second recap of everything. Make your game design document. Everything links together. Everything should be worked on. It's a living document, and so you don't make it and set it in stone. You make it and you change it as you develop things throughout the process of making the game. But by having it, all the team members access it, you have a reference point for everybody to refer back to. All these things link into each other. Adjusting one component will adjust multiple other components. How long do these documents take to make for something like a bigger indie studio? That heavily depends on the scope of the project. How long it will take, realistically, this should probably be it's not going to be complete until you complete the game. I mean, this, like I said, this is a living document that's going to be adjusted and worked on as you develop things. But having, hammering out the story is going to take the process of probably the first months of development, possibly the first weeks of development. If it's just a puzzle game, maybe it takes an hour and a long lunch. But so it will vary heavily. But this is all the pre-production stuff that you want to have done. You don't even need to go into the detail that we did here for the attacks. This is more just going into specificity that might be too much for the initial game design. Maybe not. I don't know. But then you go from this, you figure out the exact weapons, you figure out the exact details, you figure out all the other stuff. Then the game designer starts doing balance adjustments. Your artists start doing animations and sketches and sketches first. But going into that, your UI designers will start working on UI and menuing. And honestly, they'll probably be instrumental in filling out this stuff, and figuring out, what needs to be given to the player, what information needs to be handed. This is spectacular. You like it? I appreciate that a lot. I genuinely really do. That means a lot to me. Thank you for saying that. That means a lot. You mentioned it's super important for a team. How important is it to a solo development, and how does it differ? So that's a really good question. For a team, this is your core that everybody looks back to. This is on a team project, this is your beacon. This is the thing that everybody looks at and everybody has agreed upon to make sure everyone's working on the same page. You don't have to look far to find a bad game where things are disjointed, and this helps stop the disjointing effect. As a solar dev, if you're on the sun making games, as a solo dev, this, I would argue, is even more important, because if you are a solo dev, you need to keep so many things in mind at the same time, and that's almost impossible. You can't keep everything in your brain mind at the same time and still have a coherent concept. This is so much more important to a solo dev, because you will lose your story while you're working on the characters. You will lose your core gameplay loop as you add more abilities, as you add more verbs, as you choose your advancement paths. You might make the core loop untenable. You might make the difficulty curve fall out of alignment with the story. As a solo dev, this is an organizational tool. Think of it as an organizational tool as a solo dev. You need to keep your mental load as thin as possible at any given time. When you're working on audio, you need to have your genre written down so that you can refer to it instead of having the audio design project in your mind while also thinking of your target audience and your storyline. This becomes an organizational tool. For a team, this is a reference point and a beacon so that everybody has a chance to refer to and can stay organized. As a solo project, this is so you can stay organized and to offload your mental effort, so you don't have to use your entire brain mind thinks on everything at the same time. I think that it's incredibly useful for both. If you have your entire vision in your mind at once, cool. It's not going to stay there. Seriously, this is Someone earlier today said, "Hey, but what if I just what if my game design document is a strewed list of post-it notes on my desk?" And honestly, yeah, no, that is what a lot of people do. But you still have those post-it notes on your desk. All this is, you know what? Here's the takeaway for the day. Here's the takeaway for the day. This is a way of organizing all of the post-it notes on your desk. This is a way of organizing and cross-referencing all of the little post-it notes that you left on your desk when you were designing some of your game. I think that's a really good description point. This is taking all those little post-it notes of what you have as a game and organizing it in a way that you can cross-reference different elements together, because everything needs to be coherent. Everything needs to be cogent. Everything needs to be organized, and this is what that does. Does that make sense? Does that track? Mm-hmm. Just need core mechanics. Be careful of feature creep. Yeah, and this is a very good way of managing your feature creep. This is a very good way of saying, well, I want to add this new gameplay element. I want to add in another core loop, like a second core gameplay loop, where the player also has to make a cake. What if I also add a section where the player has to make a cake on top of the fighting game? That's a reference to an old Sirlin thing. If you catch that reference, props. Shout it out in the comments. And then you can take that and say, well, you know what? That doesn't really fit my core. That doesn't fit my high concept. You know what? That doesn't actually work in coherency. I would have to redesign a lot to add the cake making minigame in here. If I add the cake making minigame, I'm going to have to shuffle around a whole bunch of stuff. I'm going to have to add that to the tutorial. I'm going to have a story reason why we're making a cake in addition to playing a fighting game. And so that concept of feature creep, this can keep it in check. Or, if it doesn't keep it in check, it can keep it organized, which is a type of keeping it in check. You know what? Maybe the cake-making minigame is perfect. Maybe you need maybe the cake-making minigame is actually the core of your game. Hey, has anyone made a game where you've made a minigame as a side section of the game, and then realized, hey, wait a minute, the minigame is more fun than the actual game? Like, that's a thing that can happen too. But like this keeps that coherent and keeps that feature creep from getting out of control, because every time you add a feature, you add it to your game design document, and then you cross-reference it to other points in the game design document to make sure that it adheres to the concept and the values that you wanted in the base of the game. Saving the world with a cake. Need to have what is happening for a point in the story as well, so the music can evoke that feeling. Yeah, I mean, and the lower parts here. Visual themes of story. I'll be honest with you. This is where I put it where I'm working on stuff, but realistically, artistic layout should probably be above game overview. For realistically speaking, visual and story themes should be listed above the story and character, because those are the themes for the story and character. You know what? I realize now that I've made a mistake, like, all these years. Let's actually do that. You know what? We're doing that right now. I'm going to do that, and actually going to make that a permanent change. No, okay. Close. That was close to what I wanted to happen, but not what I wanted to happen. There. I'm actually making that a permanent change in my game design doc, but now that I've expressed it and thought about it, adding in the visual themes, because then it keeps the concept of going broader into more specific. Because the visual themes need to be more before you start going into the story elements. So yeah, no, that's actually going to be a permanent change to my game design doc now that I add more brain things to it. You put post-it notes in your notebooks. You know what? That makes sense. I respect it. Do we have any other questions or thoughts, or who else has brain things? If anyone else has brain things, feel free to say words. Well, on that note, I think we're going to end the stream. And I want to thank you all for joining. I am actually going to retire to... I'm going to retire to the Go-Godot hub, the Go-Godot Discord to talk with anybody who wants to talk. And your brain is the DVD screensaver with one brain cell bouncing around. I understand that. I respect that. And thank you all for joining me. I appreciate it. And I hope that everybody learned something. If you learned anything, then cool. If you learned anything, you know what? Shout it out in the comments. Real talk. Like, add into the how you're trying to figure out how you can bring up Chad Powerton. This needs page break. Oh, it has a page break. That's nice. I'm going to put the link. The invite link is in the description if you refresh the page. For the Go-Godot Discord as well as my own Discord. Again, I will be donating to Team C's for every subscription, so feel free to, if you think that my style of both gaming and education is interesting, subscribe and tell people who you think that might like me. Or don't. Follow your heart. I'm going to retire to the Go-Godot Discord channel for a bit, and I hope you had a wonderful day. Cheers, friends.